So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. I want to send a particularly warm welcome to our speakers. We've got Jenny Redhead from Bloomsbury, Nichola Smalley from And Other Stories, Charlotte Ryland from Queen's Translation Exchange, and Stella Sabin from Peirene Press. And this event is being run by the Society of Young Publishers. So I'll just give you a quick introduction to the Society and what we do. So we're a voluntary organisation aimed at those working in publishing in the first 10 years, their publishing career, as well as others who work in allied industries, and also publishing hopefuls who are looking to get into the publishing industry. We have regional branches in Oxford, London, the Southwest, the North, Scotland and Ireland, as well as a UK committee who oversee all of our national operations. And the SYP organises a number of speaker events throughout the year, and we also organise a range of digital content, including blog posts, podcast episodes, and video mini-series, and we're active on social media as well. So yeah, for details of our upcoming events, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram, like us on Facebook, and you can sign up for our newsletter via the website. So yeah, that's the SYP. So I think now it's time to introduce our lovely panelists. So shall we start with Jenny?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Jenny. I'm Senior Rights Manager for Bloomsbury Publishing. I mainly look after Bloomsbury Academic, and I work in a team of 5, so we split the territories between us. I'm working on mainly translation rights and some digital rights as well. I'm working in Asia, Spain and Latin America.
Awesome, thank you. And Nichola? Or you're on mute.
Yes, hi, that's one way in which live events are better, less complicated. Anyway, whatever, sorry. I'm Nichola Smalley and I am Publicity Director for the UK And Other Stories. We are a small independent press. We do a mix of translation and English language original, and I've been working for And Other Stories since 2015. My job involves quite a range of things, but mainly being a kind of public face of And Other Stories, talking to press and media, and trying to get our work talked about in the wider world.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Charlotte?
Hi, I'm Charlotte Ryland, and I always find it difficult to explain what I do because I wear multiple hats, and I did also want to mention a hat that I used to wear, which is running a project called New Books in German, which promotes German language literature in this country, because I think that's particularly relevant for this panel. But I stopped doing that last year, and in the meantime I'd set up an organisation at Oxford University, where I was once a lecturer in German, which is called the Queen's College Translation Exchange. So it's based at Queen's College, Oxford, and it's an organisation that promotes language learning and translation and international literature, particularly aimed at young people, but we do lots of events for adults as well, so it's sort of all ages. And then I also am director of the charity, the Stephen Spender Trust, which has a very similar mission to the Translation Exchange, which is not a coincidence. And we run a national prize for poetry translation, and we run education programmes, which at their core are running translation workshops in schools and getting young people engaging in international literature that way. That's all.
Thank you. And Stella?
Hi, my name's Stella, and I run Peirene Press. We're an independent publisher based in London, and we specialise in contemporary fiction in translation. Our books are all novellas, they're all under 200 pages, and the idea is that they're a book you can read in the time it takes to watch a film, although you have to be a pretty speedy reader. And I've been with Peirene for just over 2 years. And I guess because we're so small, I kind of end up doing a bit of everything from editorial to point of sale. So yeah, it's always a lot to do, but it's great.
also someone who wears many hats, I imagine, depending on the day. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully we have a really good conversation about the international book market, international fiction and non-fiction within the UK, and rights and publishing in general. So yeah, I guess going. The first thing I wanted to ask you all about is why, in your opinion, would you say it's important to have a thriving translated book market? I guess both in the UK and abroad, depending on which perspective you're coming from. So yeah, I guess where should we start? Start with Nichola.
Hi, yeah. So it's like, I guess that question is, why is it important to have any kind of thriving book market? I mean, books are ideas, right? And they represent different ways of telling stories and different ways of sharing ideas and experiences. And if you only have books from within a certain cultural a certain cultural perspective, then it's very difficult to go beyond that perspective in your understanding, in your ideas. And so one thing, I mean, like I said, we publish both translation and work, original English titles, but we try to, everything that we publish, we try to ensure that it's presenting some kind of different perspective on the world, or a different a different person's perspective, maybe a marginalized perspective, or a perspective that doesn't often get shared, or doesn't often get told in kind of mainstream UK literature. So I think that it's really important to have translated literature in the UK, because it's like input of new ideas from outside. And I think it's really important to have a thriving book market, like thriving translated book market, because I don't want people to think that ideas from outside are just outside of the UK, or outside of the English language publishing sphere, that is just one kind of book. Like, I think it's really important that, we have publishers publishing commercial literature in translation, and that we have people publishing like more difficult, kind of literary fiction, like the kind of thing that we do, but also, non-fiction, telling like really, really important stories of like events that happened in other, like, I'm sure William Dalrymple tells great stories about Pakistan and partition, but like, also, what about hearing the perspective of a woman from Pakistan who speaks, a language, like a native language of Pakistan, like, isn't it interesting to hear her perspective on that as well?
That's the thing, I think, especially in the UK, like sort of translated fiction tends to be sort of this monolith type thing, and just sort of like one perspective. So yeah, so the diversity there is, I think, really important. Stella, if you had anything you wanted to add there from Peirene's perspective.
Well, I mean, I think it's different voices, different experiences, but then there's also kind of similarities, which I think are also important. That kind of sense that wherever you're from, like, a great story translates, and you kind of, I mean, maybe you can't relate to the specifics of the story or the kind of cultural references, but that there's something kind of essential and human that connects. And I think that's a really important conversation, and one that should take place over borders and over languages. So I think it's pretty fundamental.
I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. So Charlotte, with your work, you're often engaging with young people. So how does that sort of impact there? Has sort of how important to have like a thriving sort of future readers as well?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Nikki and Stella have said. It's I mean, it's worth making the point, but it's a political act to work in translated literature, and it's become even more so in recent years. It's almost crept up by surprise on me that it's become such a kind of activist thing to do, and the reasons for that are obviously massively depressing, especially at the moment. But and I think that for me, that activism has to start with the kids. because, well, I mean, it's a good place to start, because especially at primary age, where, you know, there's this kind of pure excitement about other languages and you know, real curiosity. That's a really good moment to introduce them to literature in other languages, or literature from other languages, or the experience of moving a literature from one language to another, which is a lot of what we do with my projects. And I think the hope with that is that this idea of otherness, just because it is just sort of absorbed into their understanding of what their culture is, and that it's a complete normalization of literature. So you're no longer thinking of it as translated literature or foreign literature, but that it's just really good books, really good stories, as Stella said, and that they're accessible, and they're either accessible because they've been translated or because you learn the language and are able to read them in the language. That, I don't think that should matter either. So yeah, I think it's just, there's real potential, I think, to make some cultural and political differences through literature. And the younger you start with that, the better.
Yeah, indeed. I really want to return to that idea, actually, of sort of the activist aspect of translated literature. But before we do so, I just want to ask Jenny as well. So you come from a different perspective with A, academic text, and B, working the other way. So getting, I mean, not personally, but through rights, ensuring that academic works are translated into other languages. So yeah, just wondering if you could speak into that a little bit.
So since the 2008 recession, we've seen a real dive in not just Bloomsbury, but I think industry-wide, a dip in the number of books publishers are prepared to translate, and what they're prepared to pay for them. And I think lots of grants and funding in those countries, particularly in Europe, that all dried up. You know, it's always the way the arts is always the hardest hit. So I mean, I've been working in rights since 2012, so I've definitely seen an improvement. Let's not talk about this year.
Cheer us up.
But I guess a healthy book market is also a sign of a healthy economy as well. So what we see, and maybe this is a bit anecdotal, is that the appetite for those books is there, particularly academic books, but they struggle with the costs associated. Translation costs are quite high in some territories. I know France, for example, pays their translators really well. So the costs are high, so they'd like to publish them, but they just don't feel like, you know, the P&L doesn't work, basically. So I guess we'll see what impact COVID has on publishers' budgets over the next couple of years. And I also just wanted to add that what I do love about working in rights is that you find that the books find a new lease of life in translation. There's a process of transformation. Maybe it's like the new jacket that was designed, maybe the publisher changed the title, maybe they just found a market or an audience that, you know, Bloomsbury in English just couldn't reach. So we had this really wonderful book on Simone de Beauvoir. We published it last year. It sold in 11 languages, and it was there was lots of competition for it, some really fierce auctions going on. And I found out recently it's sold over 5,000 copies in the Netherlands, and that's a market where the level of English is quite high, so you would do fewer licenses there. So it's just one of the best parts of my job, really, to place our books in those markets and then see them do really well. And sometimes the sales will outstrip the English sales, but maybe I won't.
I work in rights as well. It's always a win in the Netherlands, especially because the level of English is so high. So when you can get a Dutch edition of a book, that's always always fantastic. Yeah, just to say to our listeners, like the P&L is referring to like the profit and loss. So basically the bottom line of the book, is this book going to be profitable in translation or in any context? So I know, Jenny, you sort of mentioned the recession having quite a big impact on sort of rights sales. I just wanted to open that out to sort of the rest of the group. Like, how do you think, sort of translating into the UK, into English rather, like how do you think the translated book market has changed? And so, Charlotte, you also mentioned like the activist side of it as well, due to sort of political situation over here. So yeah, I don't know, Nichola, so did you have any thoughts on how you've seen any change from at And Other Stories?
So we, And Other Stories was established as a consequence of the recession at the end of the, whatever you call that decade, the noughties. And basically because Stefan Tobler, our publisher, saw that that publishers were reluctant to take risks, and he felt like there was some really important literature out there, and he and like other because he's a translator as well, I'm also a translator, he and other translator colleagues were, you know, finding these amazing books in other languages and bringing them to publishers, and they were just saying, well, this is obviously a great book, but we just don't think that there's a market for it. And he felt that felt very strongly that there was a market, and yeah, and decided to set up And Other Stories, basically. And one of the ways that he decided to sort of overcome that idea of risk was to set up a subscriber scheme, of which Charlotte is a very loyal. Were you actually one of the first subscribers? You were definitely there. Like,
yes, I was. I'm very proud of that.
I feel like I ask you that every time we're like on a panel together or something. I never remember. But yeah, thank you, basically, because we have subscribers now. We have like we have about something over 1,500 subscribers in total, and each book, because the levels of subscription are different, each book has like at least 1,000 subscribers, which is a threshold that we crossed this year, which was great. It just means that like risk is slightly less. As for what's going to happen now, I mean, obviously nobody knows, but I can already tell that publishers are less risk-taking. More money is being put into bigger authors who are already big, or like debut English language authors who people think are really gonna, you know, capture a wider attention. And I feel like, I don't know how it is for you, Jenny, but like I'm really feeling, well, you already said let's not talk about this year, but like I get the impression from agents, like foreign language agents that I speak to as a translator, that they are like really, you know, it's just not flowing. So I think things are going to be interesting the next few years, but at the same time we're expanding. We've just opened we've just expanded our US office. We've got a senior editor just started in the US who basically got fired from FSG because Farah Straus-Giroux in the States, because his books are amazing, but they just weren't the big hitters they wanted. We've just got a new US publicist. We're also thinking about taking on an art director. We've got, you know, because we really want to, like, we want our books to be the best, and we want them to be out there, and we want everybody to be kind of going for them. So, you know, sometimes in a crisis you just have to like go for it.
For sure.
Can I just come in on that?
Yeah, of course.
So I just found that interesting what Jenny said about 2008 being such a watershed, because I started working at New Books in German in 2009, around about the same time. In fact, yeah, got to know Stefan from And Other Stories then, and also Peirene. When was Peirene founded, Stella?
2008.
Yeah, so it was, and before that I'd been in academia, so I didn't have all that much direct experience of publishing before then. So for me, those 10 years that I was at MBG would just didn't feel like the aftermath of the crisis at all. It felt like this amazingly exciting time because of publishers like And Other Stories and Peirene, and Fitzcarraldo, and more independent publishers he set up with this explicit mission to get more translated literature into the market. And I think it's, you know, so important what Nikki said about the subscription model and how that's worked, because that and other things that these publishers have done has created, it's like you've created a readership for translated literature, you've created the market, and it's such a lovely community of people who are interested in it. And I think, you know, once you've got that sort of passionate group, then it can spread and become more mainstream. But that's certainly been my experience of the world of translated literature has been, yeah, just the huge growth and real diversity and range over those 10 years, and that's almost been exclusively down to the independent publishers who are really pushing the boundaries.
I don't know, Stella, if you had anything to add on that point.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's because it's such an engaged community, and often, I mean, as a small independent press, you're often engaging directly with the people who read your books. So I think your concept of risk is very, very different, because obviously you should always be trying to expand your audience, but at the same time, you know your audience so well. I mean, even to the point that maybe you're communicating with them directly. So I think your kind of assessment of whether something is going to be a risk is maybe very different. Yeah.
There was I don't know if you saw the article in The Atlantic by a publisher, can't remember his name, sorry, and it was about the Penguin Simon Schuster acquisition, but his point was that as these sort of giant companies grow, they become more risk averse, and then it's always down to the independent publishers to take a chance on yeah, like on someone who isn't just like a best-selling author. You know, it's not another David Walliams, it's something a bit different. But you know, I think the merger will still go ahead, but it's good that independents are being championed at the same time.
It's a really interesting article. I also read it. I don't know if I could ask Fliss if you could find it online to put it in the chat for people to look to at the leisure. We can do it at the end of the webinar, because it's definitely a really interesting article about, you know, risk and the size of the publisher, and as you say, how independents are championing those, yes, smaller authors, I suppose, and authors from abroad and all these things. I just wanted to mention at this point as well, just to our audience, that if you've got any questions, please do feel free to use the Q&A function. We're going to keep going with our questions, but yeah, just feel free to shout if you've got any questions, either in the chat or in using the Q&A, and we'll be answering them throughout. So yeah, feel free.
The piece in The Atlantic is by a guy called Dennis Johnson. I'm not quite sure who that is, but
I would have called him David, so I'm glad I didn't say anything.
And you could, yeah. Anyway, you can always Google. I found it on my phone, so I can't put it on the. Anyway, whatever.
I think it's worth picking up on what Nikki was saying about the importance of commercial fiction being translated as well. You know, it relates to everything we're saying about the, you know, the importance of building a readership, and the idea that, you know, that this really entrenched idea that doing a translated book is always a risk, and therefore, you know, a big publisher is always going to be averse to it because they're always risk averse. That's just, you know, hello, Nikki's. Yeah, that's something that I suppose I guess this also relates to my work with kids as well, and just trying to make it all more accessible and more mainstream. But it was really high up on my agenda at New Books in German as well, that we, especially with the view that there is of German literature in this country anyway, like we don't need to do any more work to make it seem highbrow or too, intense, etc. Our work is far more about making it seem accessible and making it therefore commercially viable. And I was always really advocating for there to be a balance between what might be considered more highbrow literature and the crime fiction, for example, that is, of which there is tons of, and a lot of it very good in Germany. And I think that is something that's still, that translated literature and that the market here still struggles with a bit, and it's it also relates to, I don't know if we're going to talk about funding, but it does relate to how translated books are often funded, and the involvement of cultural institutes with agendas and preferences. So yeah, that sort of affects the market as well.
I think that's an interesting point about, like, say, translated fiction just being perceived as this sort of very literary thing, having something that's also having a broad range of fiction in translation and non-fiction in translation being very important. I sort of wanted to open that up to everyone else. Like, what do you find in your line of work is the biggest misconception about translated fiction and non-fiction? I know, Nichola, you are a translator yourself. Do you come across misconceptions in your line of work as a translator?
So it's an interesting one. Like, I mean, aside from the fact that people always think a translator is an interpreter, and that you can, like, so interpreting is like, things like conference interpreting, when you're sitting there, somebody else is talking and you're like talking in a different, you're saying their words in a different language. And translating is like sitting there at a keyboard for hours at a time. That is like, I mean, that's just a very basic misconception that people have. I don't know. I mean, I think people are often very curious, because people want to know, what lies behind. I did a PhD that, like, part of it was about translation as well, and it was particularly about translating slang. And people always ask about things like untranslatability and, oh, how did you manage that word? And often, like, okay, so here is a misconception: the idea that you sit with a string of words basically, and you translate those words. It's very much more, what a translator does is they sit and they translate a story or a concept or an idea or like an image. And so they sit there and they might be working with words, but they won't, if they see something says, he walked the dog. That's terrible. I don't know. I can't think of a good example off the top of my head. But basically, you're not just like taking the word "he walked the dog." You're translating all the connotations of like what that might be, and all of the image of what that walk was, as required by what the original language, like what the original sentence was in the language. That's not very clear.
Yeah.
But I think that's my main thing. Like about the actual process of translation.
I don't know if, Jenny, if you find this with rights and with sort of communicating with authors, for example, do you find there's quite a lot of misconceptions about what the translation would involve from their perspective?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are lots of conversations at the moment about the accessibility of publishing and it all being a bit of a mystery, but rights is definitely like a really misunderstood area, even within the publishing house by our own colleagues. And that's fine. It's our job to explain what we're doing and why we're there. My experience is that some authors experience this anxiety about translations. It seems very distant to them and out of their control, because you are handing rights over to another company, and especially in academic we, if an author has an agent and they're in a trade house, they would probably be involved in the whole process, like, and have approval of a negotiation. Whereas that's not really the case in academic, unless it's written into their contract. There are so many books, so many licenses. We just have to get on with it. So just thinking about how to reassure authors that it's okay. This is a reputable company that we're licensing with. And another thing we find is that there's this expectation in academic publishing that we should give these rights away for free. Maybe, the author doesn't necessarily know that there's a thriving book market in China that's 40% of our business. They don't know that this massive publisher is, a multi-million, dollar turnover every year. So those are the questions that we come up against, and we just gently try and explain that they have some money and they can afford it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. Stella, you had anything to add?
Well, just in terms of translation, I think going back to Charlotte's point, we used to do back in normal times, we used to sell our books at markets, and you would often have, it was kind of an amazing thing because you would have these face-to-face interactions with potential readers. And one thing that kind of came up, I think people think that our books are going to be hard work because they're translations. And that's not true. They're plot driven with strong voices, and but I think because people maybe, I don't know, kind of associate, I don't know what the association is necessarily, but they certainly seem to come at it thinking that it's going to be hard work. And I don't know whether that's because they've maybe encountered translation through maybe classic texts or something like that, but they don't, but that's probably the misconception that we come up against.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, the idea of like, oh, is this going to be difficult? I mean, to be fair, we do actually publish quite a lot of difficult texts, but also the idea that like it's not going to be like the language is going to be different, the language is going to be difficult, that it's going to like read like something that's been translated. I don't really know what that means, but like they're not going to feel like this is just a book. They're going to feel like they're reading it through a kind of veil. But if it's well translated, that shouldn't be the case. It should be a book that stands on its feet in English. And we edit our books very thoroughly, and often, the books that get translated, well, they've already been, not in every market, but in a lot of markets, they've already been edited. So they've and they've often won prizes. They've gotten great, critical response, and that's how they reach our attention. That's how they come to be translated in the first place. So really, like, in a way, these are like the best books of all the books. You've already got like a quality guarantee in the very fact that it's been translated.
Yeah, thank you. It's still really interesting. So I've got some questions in now from our listeners, and sort of moving slightly towards like career focused questions. So we've got one from this person. When it comes to working in an international publishing market, how important is it to speak another language? So I guess how much do you use languages in your day-to-day work, or do you find that it does tend to be more in English? I don't know, Jenny, if you want to start with this with foreign rights, for example.
I guess you should have ideally you would have a language, or at least a demonstrable interest in other cultures and travelling. I've been learning French for maybe like 5 years. My partner's French, his family are, so you need to speak to them. So that's important for me, but I actually don't look after France. So no, I'm not using it at work. my colleagues do to some extent, but they say it's not always necessary, and sometimes the customer prefers to speak to you in English. If you have like a conversational level in a language, sometimes it can be hard to suddenly then pitch this philosophical text. You might be better served just speaking in English. Sorry, I'm not. In my experience, the publishers who really need languages are probably co-edition publishers, or they're working with more tradey and children's publishers as well. That seems to be where having languages is essential. But I haven't found it as much in academic.
It's showing the interest, isn't it? Languages are just one way of showing an interest in sort of an international book market, international culture. I don't know, Stella, if you find this if you're buying in fiction, say from foreign publishers, is it useful to be able to do those conversations in a foreign language, or is it more in English?
Yeah, I mean, it would be useful, but if you're publishing from across the world, you're never going to be able to. Well, it would be nice if you could speak to every agent in every country, but it's not. It's unlikely. So of course, it's an asset, but I don't think it certainly doesn't mean that you can't work in international publishing, and it's never too late to learn a language anyway. It can't hurt. But there are so many different roles in a publishing house, and ideally what you're looking for in an office is people with a myriad of different skills and people who can fill in where other people don't have the skills, and you will balance it out. So definitely don't be put off if you don't have another language is what I would say.
Yeah, I think like in Under the Stories, we are quite multilingual. Like I speak, or I read at least, all the Scandinavian languages, and also German, and like a smattering of other things. Stefan translates from Portuguese and German. Our production editor, Emma, speaks Spanish. We also have like French speakers, and we have quite a multilingual office, and it's really helpful when we are looking to acquire things, because if you can't read the whole of a book, foreign rights agents, agents from other languages or other countries will often commission samples, or we can commission samples, and you can also commission readers' reports if you're interested in a book but you don't speak the language. But it can cause problems if you can't read a whole book, because you might find out, we have in the past had to scrap project. We have stumbled into difficulties with certain projects because we found that there were problematic aspects to the text that weren't clear initially. So that said, like, we definitely, we're really keen to publish things from languages that we don't speak. We don't speak the language that it's written in, and that's where our reading groups come in very handy. So we have these reading groups where lots of different people who do speak a particular language meet to read 3 or 4 books over the course of a few months, and discuss those books, and then at the end of it, we might end up publishing 1 or more of those books. And that's a really great way for us to kind of draw on expertise of like the wider community. But yeah,
sure. I just wondering as well, like, so all sort of working different areas of sort of international publishing and international book market, and just wondered what drew you all to working in this area. What's been kind of your, I suppose, story so far in your careers? I don't know, if Charlotte, you want to kick us off.
Yes. Lots of answers to that question. I'm just trying to think about which one to give. I mean, I think my move from academia to publishing, or to whatever new books in German is, it's kind of a mixture of publishing and various other things. It was partly, well, it was a lot to do with wanting to do something that was very immediate, that had an immediate impact. Wanting to do something that is very people oriented and sort of dynamic. Not that academia is not those things, but it wasn't, my experience of it wasn't necessarily like that. And but I didn't want to leave literature behind. I mean, I was an academic in literature, and you know, that is my true love still. And I didn't want, you know, I still wanted to work with books, but I wanted to work with them in this kind of more dynamic, impactful way. And I guess that then the experience that I had of translation through that, seeing what happened when people translate together, how exciting that is, how it gives people a sort of a different way of approaching other cultures and other texts, then that's what led me into this sort of more activist role. Yeah.
Nice. Stella, I don't know if you wanted to jump in there.
So how I got into publishing?
Yeah, I guess I got into publishing, how I got to Peirene, yeah. The whole shebang.
I mean, I kind of how I came to run Peirene is that well, it's a long story. I mean, I love working in publishing. I don't think I necessarily, I work across two fields because I work in audio production as well, and I look at the jobs in quite a similar way, because they're both about storytelling, which is fundamentally what I'm interested in. And I love working in both fields because I guess with a book, it's this wonderful thing of but by the end of it, you've got this product that you can share with people, and it's a real physical thing, and it's got like a real tangible impact because you've got all these readers who have said that they love it and have bought it and have told their friends about it. And that's what keeps me doing it. And I don't think my journey into publishing was particularly interesting. I set out looking for a publishing job and got a publishing job. It's been a kind of experience of learning by doing, which has been great. And I feel really lucky to be doing that.
Nothing wrong with that. Apply for a job, got a job. Sometimes it's as simple as that. I don't know if Jenny, from a sort of rights perspective, how you got into, what sort of drew you to rights, and how did you get in?
Sorry to say, I stumbled into it by accident.
People do with rights.
Yeah. Well, I completed the publishing masters at Brooks in 2012, and went to a networking event, met a publicist, and did a publicity internship at Princeton University Press in the summer. Through an SYP event, found a temping job at OUP, which was really well paid. Then was asked back to interview for a rights admin position at Princeton, and that was only part-time. So for like 6 months, I was working, in a shop as well. Wouldn't recommend any of this to any of you. But then eventually, the role went full-time. I progressed. My manager went on maternity leave, so I got to look after the rights for the press for a year. And then I think from there, you just find a little bit of self-belief eventually. And I went on, I signed up to like a buddy scheme through the Independent Publishers Guild. And they put me in touch with the rights manager. We got chatting, became friendly. She retired. I moved into her role for Bloomsbury. So long story short, go to these events, network, and who knows where it might lead.
That's good advice. I mean, that's good advice. So sometimes sort of serendipitous opportunities that just appear, which is nice. I don't know if Nichola, you had anything you wanted to add, like how you got to where you are now?
I did my PhD and then I finished it, and I wanted to. Oh, look, there's a small child again. Hi. Sorry, hang on, I'm just going to mute myself.
No worries.
No. They're just looking for something. Okay. Right, thanks, the Pentagon. I did a PhD and I didn't want to be in academia after that because, I saw this job vacancy for like a traineeship and other stories, doing publicity, marketing, and sales. So basically half of the company, and I got excited and thought, oh, I'll just apply for that, like, you know, to practice applying for jobs. And I think they couldn't have had any other good applicants because I got the job. I think basically like they wanted somebody who really knew what they were about, and I had gone to lots of translation events, and I'd gone to lots of things. I mean, again, like this whole thing about going to events and like speaking to people, asking sensible questions, and kind of informing yourself. That I think that's what got me the job. Basically, it was just like being informed and curious.
Yeah, that's good advice. So we've had loads and loads of questions actually, which is awesome. So I probably won't get a chance to answer all of them, unfortunately. We've got one here from Marina saying, in most British bookshops, books in translation are often still to be found in a separate section. Do you think we will see books in translation on the same shelf as original works in English, I suppose, like you do abroad? Yeah, Charlotte, I don't know. What do you think?
It's like the $1 million question, isn't it? So I think, I mean, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier on about the status of translated literature and the perception of it, and to what extent we need to change that. And I think it's really tricky because, well, I suppose it also relates to what we were saying about building an audience, and you know, and other stories, reading groups, and the salons that Peirene used to do, and subscribers and everything, like and building a community of people who identify as readers of international literature, and that it clearly is important for building this market. So therefore, you might conclude that we need tables in bookshops that are called like world literature or lost in translation, as they or found in translation, as they so often are, because then you are appealing to the readers that you know are going to be looking for that kind of thing. But then on the other hand, that there's a real risk of siloing, and meaning that you're not getting beyond those readers. I don't know enough about bookshop systems to know whether it's possible to do both or whether that would be crazy. Yeah, and whether there is, because I think at the moment what you often get is you do get the kind of siloing, like these are the books in translation, but then maybe some of the better sellers do find their way onto the kind of the general fiction shelves. So I think we already are in a kind of hybrid state, but I don't know. I think it's still I don't know which way to go. I guess the question is, will we one day see them on the shelves? And I really hope so. I think that would mean that we'd moved beyond where we're at now, which is still not satisfactory, although a lot better than it was, but not yet. I think probably is my answer to that.
I think in a lot of shops, translated fiction is just shelved in fiction, right? And you might have like a table that draws attention to the fact that it's translated fiction, but I'm just actually thinking about what's the Blackwell's bookshop in Oxford that has a really bad fiction in translation like cupboard at the end. So the really massive bookshop, and they've got like yards and yards of fiction books, and then this like really dusty old bit for translation. So they need to work harder. But otherwise, I think it's pretty positive.
It does completely depend on what bookshop you're in, and in fact, booksellers are doing fantastic work to push translated fiction and just books from independent presses in general. And I think yeah, I mean, in so many great independent bookshops, you will find them all mixed on different shelves. But then also, I actually think the spotlight features have their place as well, especially when it comes to independent publishing, because actually, you kind of, if you're a small publisher without the marketing budget, it's fantastic if someone can put you on a special stand. But then I guess you've got, you know, your Nausgaards and your Ferrantes, and you'll find them in the main on the first table when you walk into a Waterstones. So I think it's not all bleak.
Jenny, if you had any.
Oh, well, I was just thinking. Oh,
sorry, Jenny. I just realised that I accidentally like hid somebody's question. So there's one question in the answered section, which.
Oh like, yeah, I can see it. That's fine.
We haven't got very much time left. Oh, I'll just quickly answer this one. But sorry, Jenny.
Oh, I was just wondering, how are you, as independent publishers, how are you finding access to, what do I mean? Mainstream media book reviews pages. Are translated books getting the visibility they deserve? And I guess that does have an impact on sales and whether a bookseller might choose to put you on a table at the door.
I don't know what Nikki thinks, but I think it's quite bad at the moment. I mean, lots of the review sections have been cut during the pandemic, and it was hard enough to get attention as an independent press, but now I think it's really tricky, and you're having to be really innovative about how you're going to get the word out there, and especially now without physical events. that kind of catch for a reviewer is gone as well. And it was competitive, but now it's really difficult, and of course that does have an impact on sales.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain places that are really supportive, like the Guardian and the TLS, and I mean, like basically all the time I've worked in publishing, doing publicity, which is 5 years, I've gradually just seen it shrink and shrink and shrink. First the independent closed, they used to be great. Then, like, you know, the Guardian regularly gets down-paged. The TLS briefly got up-paged a few years ago, but then got down-paged again. It's really hard. I guess we just have to keep pushing the message that like these are the most important, or it's like some of the most important books out there. You know, they're like telling stories in ways that nobody else is telling them, and they're like,
for sure.
Yeah, but it's not looking great right now.
There's another challenge, which is that media is quite hard. It's not just papers. The kind of getting radio space or getting your authors in at literary festivals is difficult, especially if maybe English isn't there. They don't speak English. That's difficult.
I think also it's compounded by like the fact that because people are buying things online, generally. You know, in this year in particular, because people have been going to Amazon, you know, Amazon saw a huge increase in their profits. Don't buy things from Amazon, everybody. That has meant that like big authors, especially big backlist authors, have been really like dominating because, you know, the algorithms show you things that other people like. right? And that means that people, the big things just get more screen time. So that is another challenge that we faced, and I think we've been trying to kind of get around that with our own digital marketing efforts and so on, but it's challenging.
Yeah. Just wanted to sorry, as there's been a few people who are sort of upvoting this particular question, which I wanted to sort of squeeze in before, because we're already like nearly at 7 p.m. So I just wanted to ask this one quickly. So that many people advocate freelance editorial experience and book selling experience as a background to get into roles such as editorial sales and marketing, because there's few internships at the moment. And would you say that these experiences are transferable to working in rights, I suppose Jenny in particular, and with translated books? So what kind would you say, if you can't find an internship at the moment, what experience would you say stands out to you if you were to hire somebody in their first publishing role? I guess start with Jenny in rights. What sort of things do you look for?
Well, just quickly, this isn't very exciting, but some like office or admin experience that is essential to rights. Like 80% of my job is like logging and recording things. So yes, if you enjoy books, you enjoy talking about them, maybe you've worked in book selling, this is all brilliant because you bring that flair. You know, part of my job is pitching, so you would bring that with you, but can you stay on top of the basic admin? If I was hiring rights admin or a rights assistant at the minute, that's what I'd be looking for in a candidate.
Yeah, it's really useful to know. Stella, if you...
I totally agree with Jenny. If I'd like to see that you that kind of work experience where you've got kind of administrative organization skills, well, that's crucial. I think in the past, maybe I think it's quite good if you can have like a bookstagram or some kind of, it used to be that if you were blogging about books, that would be great. I could see that you could, write well about books and that you were passionate about books. Now it's good if kind of you can show that you understand the social media and communication. That's brilliant. Yeah.
It's a good shout. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say any kind of digital marketing background, like a lot of people who work in publishing, they use social media, but they don't necessarily understand how to do marketing in social media. And that's expertise that we all need, because as we've said, the other avenues are shrinking and people spend more and more time on their phones, more and more time in kind of digital environments. Events experience is also really helpful. Like anybody who can pull together a brilliant digital event this year is going to be like, I mean, hopefully we're not going to all be sitting in front of our screens 24/7, like this time next year. But I think we are all also going to have to learn something from this year, and so yeah, I think like there will be more digital events in the long term, and the ones that are going to succeed are going to be the ones that are really exciting, where people have done something that makes it an actual experience.
Charlotte, you had any final thoughts?
Well, I feel like my area is a bit more sort of niche than the others, but I think in the kind of advocating for international literature side of things, having experience of the market was always really helpful. I mean, we always found working with booksellers particularly helpful when we were selecting books for new books in German, because they were able to tell us what was likely to be bought. So yeah, I think that kind of experience is particularly helpful.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. It's been this hour has absolutely flown by, and there's still so many more questions, which is really sad. So I don't know if any of you would be up for, so to put you on the spot like this, if you can be contacted anywhere, if people could ask their questions on social media or anywhere like that. I don't know if you would mind putting your social media handles in the chat, and perhaps people can get in touch if your question wasn't answered. Sorry, there were so many. It's so hard, and such interesting questions as well. So hard to get to them all. But yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining us, and thank you so much to our panelists for a really interesting conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. And just to say that, yeah, the SYP, we run events throughout the year. This is actually our last event of 2020, which is really sad. But SYP Oxford and SYP North are doing a joint book club on the 14th of December. We're reading Exit Management by Naomi Booth. So that's at 6:30 on Monday, the 14th. So if you can join us for that, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, yeah, we're still on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We have our podcast, and check out our podcast episodes wherever you get your podcasts. We've got our blog, Press Forward, and also all of our previous events are on YouTube. So you should search the Society of Young Publishers on YouTube. All of our previous events are there, and this one will be going up there as well. So yeah, plenty of content to keep you busy over the Christmas period in case you are missing your publishing careers content. But otherwise, yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining us, and we will see you in 2021. So yeah, have a good evening everyone, and take care.